The air at Oriole, Manhattan's most exclusive and ferociously guarded temple of gastronomy, was so rarefied it felt like a different element altogether. It was a place where silence was the most expensive thing on the menu, a hushed, reverent quiet broken only by the discreet clinking of solid silver against porcelain and the low, conspiratorial murmur of men who measured their worth in billions. The light was dim, golden, designed to make diamonds sparkle and old money look timeless. Each table was an island, a private kingdom in a galaxy of immense wealth and power. And at the center of this galaxy, at table 17, his regular Wednesday night throne, sat Richard Blackstone, Devon Williams, 26 years old, and 3 months into his tenure as a waiter in this alien world, approached the table with the practiced, invisible grace of a ghost. His movements were fluid, economical, his face a mask of serene professional deference. He held a bottle of 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild, a wine that cost more than his entire year's rent, as if it were a simple bottle of water. For 3 months, he had observed Richard Blackstone. He had studied his habits, his arrogance, the casual, thoughtless cruelty with which he treated the staff, the way he dismissed them as if they were not human beings but functional, interchangeable pieces of furniture. He had watched, he had listened, and he had waited. And tonight, the wait was over. He poured the wine, the deep ruby liquid catching the light, a perfect, silent stream, into the cavernous crystal glass. As Blackstone reached for the glass, a flash of light from his hand caught Devon's eye. It was the ring, a magnificent, obscene piece of jewelry, a single massive Burmese ruby, the color of pigeon's blood, surrounded by a constellation of flawless, ice-white diamonds. It was a ring designed not just to be worn, but to be wielded, a symbol of untouchable power. It was unique, a custom piece from a famed Parisian jeweler, created in 1942. Only 2 had ever been made, and the other one, the identical twin to the one sparkling on the billionaire's hand, was currently sitting in a small velvet-lined box in a drawer in Devon's cramped Brooklyn apartment. The moment had arrived, the moment he had spent 2 years of his life meticulously, obsessively, planning for. He took a slow, steadying breath, the air in the super-chilled dining room feeling suddenly thick, electric. "Excuse me, sir," Devon said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the hushed ambience of the restaurant like a surgeon's scalpel. "But my mother has a ring just like that one." The silence that descended upon table 17 was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound out of their immediate vicinity. Richard Blackstone, a 62-year-old real estate mogul with a $3 billion fortune and a heart of stone, froze. His hand, the one wearing the ring, stopped halfway to his glass. He looked up, his eyes, the color of a winter sky, fixing on the young black man who had just served him his $1,200 bottle of wine. For a long, charged moment, Blackstone's mind, a high-speed processor of deals and acquisitions, struggled to compute the data, the waiter, the ring, the impossible, catastrophic collision of his past and his present. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold, sickening sensation that started in his gut and spread like ice through his veins. "That's impossible," Blackstone muttered, the words a dry, ragged whisper. His voice, a tool he had used his entire life to command, to intimidate, to destroy, had betrayed him. It was the voice of a man who had just seen a ghost. The waiter, whose name tag identified him simply as Devon, maintained his professional smile, but his eyes, when Blackstone finally dared to meet them, held something else entirely. It was not fear, it was not awe, it was a deep, disturbing, and utterly unshakable calm, the kind of calm that only exists in those who have discovered truths too powerful to be ignored, in those who know, with absolute certainty, that they hold the winning hand. Devon Williams had spent the last 3 months learning the rhythms of this place, the secret language of its clientele. He knew every detail of their lives, the details they carelessly dropped in conversations they assumed he was too simple to understand. He knew about Richard Blackstone's impending merger, his secret third mistress, his son's gambling problem. He knew everything, but most importantly, he knew the man himself, the man who sat at table 17 every Wednesday night, always alone, always arrogant, always treating the staff as if they were less than human. "Maybe it's just a coincidence, sir," Devon said, but his voice carried a delicate, almost imperceptible note of irony, a subtle musical threat that made the hairs on the back of Blackstone's neck stand up. "Although my mother always said she inherited her ring from her old boss, a very generous man, she called him." Blackstone's hand, the one not wearing the ring, clenched his linen napkin so tightly that he could feel the fine fabric begin to tear. A small, almost invisible tremor started in his fingers. He tried to process what he was hearing, to fit it into the neat, orderly, and ruthless world he had constructed for himself. The second ring, the one he had given to the young, terrified maid back in 1995, the one that was supposed to have disappeared forever, along with the girl and the dangerous secrets she carried. Devon watched every micro-expression on the billionaire's face. He catalogued every bead of sweat that began to form on his artificially tanned forehead. He noted every desperate, futile attempt to maintain the mask of cold, impenetrable composure that had served him so well for so long. "Does your mother still have the ring?" Blackstone asked, trying to make his voice sound casual. A master of the universe making idle conversation with a servant. He failed, miserably. "She did," Devon corrected him gently, and for the first time his professional smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of something raw and painful. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy and sharp as stones. She couldn't afford the proper treatment. The weight of those words, spoken in the quiet, opulent dining room, echoed across the decades like a judgment. Blackstone knew exactly who Devon's mother was. Grace Williams. He remembered her name, her face, the look of terror in her young eyes. He knew what he had done to her. He knew why she had never reported him, why she had never gone to the police. He knew why she had disappeared from the city, from his life, carrying nothing but that ring, a single, beautiful, and terrible piece of evidence of a decades-long injustice. Devon straightened up, adjusting the silver tray he held with the practiced elegance of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, of someone who was in complete and utter control. "I get you anything else, sir?" he asked, his voice once again a model of professional deference. "Perhaps a photograph of my mother. She kept several from the time she worked for important people." Blackstone's eyes widened. The blood that had drained from his face now rushed back, a hot, furious tide of panic. This was no coincidence. This was not a random, unfortunate encounter. This was a declaration of war. A war that had been delivered not with a shout, but with a whisper, with the surgical, devastating precision of someone who had planned every word, every gesture, every single, excruciating moment. "That it won't be necessary," Blackstone replied, his voice now a full octave higher than normal. Devon nodded, that same disturbing, infuriating calm settling back over his features. "Of course, sir. I'll be right here if you change your mind. After all," he added, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was for Blackstone's ears alone, "some stories, they just need to be told, don't they?" As he turned and walked away from the table, his footsteps silent on the thick, plush carpet, Devon could feel Blackstone's desperate, terrified gaze burning into his back. The plan, a plan that had been 2 years in the making, a plan that had been born in the grief and rage of his mother's funeral, was finally, irrevocably, in motion. And the best part, the most beautiful part, was that Richard Blackstone, the untouchable king, still had no idea how deep the hole he had dug for himself truly was. Blackstone finished his meal in a daze. The exquisite 12-course tasting menu, a symphony of flavors that had been designed by a world-renowned chef, tasted like ash in his mouth. He could feel Devon's eyes on him, a quiet, constant, and unnerving presence. It was exactly the reaction Devon had hoped for. He had studied Blackstone for months, had learned his psychology. He knew that the man's arrogance was a fragile shell, protecting a deep, paranoid fear of losing control, and Devon had just taken that control away from him. 2 hours later, after the workday had officially ended for the staff, Devon found Blackstone waiting for him in the deserted alley behind the restaurant. He was leaning against a silver Bentley, a car that cost more than most people earned in 5 years, trying to look casual, powerful, but Devon could see the nervous tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed a frantic, silent rhythm against the polished hood of the car. "We need to talk," Blackstone said, his voice an attempt at the authoritative command he was used to. It came out as a weak, reedy thing. "Sure, Mr. Blackstone," Devon replied, walking up to the man who had haunted his nightmares since he was a child. He maintained the same infuriating calm that had so thoroughly unnerved the billionaire. "In the restaurant, my shift just ended." "Your mother," Blackstone began, his eyes darting around the empty alley as if he were expecting an ambush. "What was her name again?" "Grace Williams," Devon replied simply, the name a quiet, powerful indictment. "She worked for you, cleaning your mansion in Greenwich. In 1995, the name hit Blackstone like a physical blow. Grace Williams, the 19-year-old girl he had hired, fresh off the bus from Alabama, desperate for work, pregnant, and abandoned by her boyfriend. The quiet, almost invisible girl who had the profound misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The girl who had witnessed one of his special meetings, a late-night session with a group of shadowy Russian investors in the soundproofed basement of his mansion. A meeting where false documents were signed, where bags of dirty money changed, hands where the foundations of his corrupt empire were laid. I don't remember any Grace. Blackstone lied, but his voice, his eyes, the sudden tick in his jaw, all betrayed the vivid, ugly memory he was so desperately trying to suppress. Devon smiled. It was not the professional, deferential smile he wore in the restaurant. This was something else entirely. It was a slow, cold, dangerous smile. A smile that held the weight of 29 years of pain and anger. It's funny how memory works, isn't it? He said. My mother remembered every single detail, especially the night you offered her that ring. The night in question had been a cold, dark evening in December of 1995. Grace had been cleaning his office. Her movements, quiet, unobtrusive. She had heard shouting, Blackstone, on the phone, yelling about problems with the zoning authorities, about evidence that needed to disappear. She had hidden behind a thick velvet curtain, her heart pounding, and she had listened. She had heard the details of the bribes, the forged documents, the illegal construction in a protected wetland area. When Blackstone had hung up the phone and turned, he had seen her terrified 19-year-old girl, a cleaning rag clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with a knowledge that could destroy him. How much did you hear? He had asked, his voice a low, menacing growl as he advanced towards her. Nothing, sir. I was just cleaning. But they had both known it was a lie. Your mother was a very discreet woman, Blackstone said now. In the alley, choosing his words with a lawyer's careful precision. She always respected her employer's privacy. Discreet. Devon laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound. That's an interesting way to describe someone who was threatened with death if she ever spoke a single word about what she saw. The memory, ugly and vivid, came back to Blackstone with full force. He had given Grace the ring that night. It was not a gift. It was a leash, a beautiful, glittering, and terrible reminder of the silent, unbreakable agreement between them. This ring, he had told her, his voice a cold, terrifying whisper, is worth more than you will earn in 10 years. A symbol of my generosity. But if you ever open your mouth about what you heard here tonight, I will personally guarantee that you, and the baby you are carrying, will disappear from the face of this earth without a trace. Grace had taken the ring with hands that trembled so violently she could barely close her fingers around it. She had known, in that moment, that she was not just accepting a piece of jewelry. She was accepting a life sentence of silence. She never said a word, Devon continued, his voice now as cold and as hard as the rain-slicked pavement beneath their feet. She moved to Detroit. She raised me on her own, working 3 different jobs. She always said that the truth, one day, would find its way out. Blackstone, feeling the ground slipping away beneath him, tried to regain control of the situation, to fall back on the one tool that had never failed him, his money. Look, kid, he said, trying to affect a tone of weary, paternalistic reason. I don't know what kind of fantasy your mother created for you, but I'm a generous man. I can offer you something, a better job, perhaps, $50,000, for you to forget these crazy stories, a bribe. It was exactly what Devon had been hoping for. It was the confirmation he needed. Blackstone still believed that everyone had a price, that every problem, every person, could be bought. $50,000, Devon said, pretending to consider the offer. He let out a slow, sad sigh. You know, it's funny. My mother died owing $230,000 in medical bills. The insurance she had from her 3 minimum wage jobs didn't cover the experimental cancer treatment that could have saved her life. The sarcasm in his voice was as sharp and as cold as a surgeon's scalpel. $50,000. It's almost insulting, don't you think? Blackstone felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. This was not a desperate, greedy victim who could be easily bought off. There was something else here. Something calculated. Something planned. 100,000. Then, Blackstone offered, his voice now tinged with a new, unfamiliar note of desperation. That's my final offer. Devon shook his head slowly, a look of profound, almost pitying disappointment on his face. You still don't get it, do you? He said softly. This was never about the money. Then what do you want? Blackstone demanded, his voice a ragged whisper. Justice, Devon replied simply. My mother spent 29 years of her life living in fear, moving from city to city whenever she thought you had found us. working herself to death because she could never use the references from her time working in your mansion, dying in silence because she was terrified that if she ever spoke the truth, I would be the one to pay the price. The truth was, Grace had tried. She had tried to tell her story several times over the years. She had gone to a local reporter in Detroit, a young, ambitious journalist who had seemed interested, who had taken notes, who had promised to investigate. The story had been mysteriously, inexplicably pulled at the last minute. She had gone to a civil rights lawyer in Chicago, a man who had seemed outraged, who had promised to help. His office had been broken into the following week, and all of his files, including Grace's, had been stolen with each failed attempt. Grace had understood, with a growing, soul-crushing certainty, the true extent of Richard Blackstone's power. She died believing you were untouchable, Devon said, his eyes boring into Blackstone's. But things have changed a lot in the last few years, haven't they, Mr. Blackstone? The world is a little more transparent now. It's a little harder to make people disappear. Blackstone tried one last pathetic shot at intimidation. You watch your words, kid, he snarled. I have lawyers who can destroy your life. With a single phone call. I'm sure you do, Devon replied calmly. But I have something that your lawyers will never be able to buy, or intimidate, or destroy. And what would that be? Blackstone asked, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. Devon smiled again, and this time, Richard Blackstone felt a genuine, bone-deep chill of fear. Patience, Devon said, and a plan that has taken too long, meticulous years to execute. As he turned and walked away, leaving Blackstone standing alone in the dark, rain-soaked alley, Devon felt the weight of the promise he had made at his mother's grave. Grace Williams had died in silence, but Richard Blackstone was about to learn that her son had inherited not only her ring, but her perfect, unforgiving memory for injustice. Every threat, every bribe, every pathetic attempt to assert his power, had only confirmed that Devon was on the right path. What Blackstone didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that every word of their conversation had been recorded by the discreet state-of-the-art device in Devon's pocket, and that this was only the first move in a game that the billionaire didn't even realize he had already irrevocably lost. For the next 2 weeks, Richard Blackstone did exactly what Devon and his team had predicted he would. He fell back on the two tactics that had served him his entire life: intimidation and money. The psychological pressure began subtly, anonymous. Phone calls to Devon's apartment in the middle of the night, with nothing but silence on the other end. A black sedan, the same model as Blackstone's, parked across the street from his building for hours at a time. Then came the professional pressure. The owner of Oriole, a man who depended on Blackstone's patronage, called Devon into his office. He spoke of problem employees, of the importance of discretion, of how a single powerful customer's complaint could damage the restaurant's pristine reputation. Devon, playing his part perfectly, feigned fear and confusion. He promised to be more careful. He knew that Blackstone was trying to isolate him, to make him feel powerless, to remind him of his place in the world. But Devon had learned from his mother that patience was a more powerful weapon than any direct confrontation. Each new attempt at intimidation was not a threat, it was a gift. It was another piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin Blackstone was so eagerly building for himself. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, the next phase of Blackstone's attack arrived. Devon was waiting for the bus, a deliberate choice to project an image of financial vulnerability, when a man in an expensive but understated suit approached him. Devon Williams, the man asked, his voice smooth and professional. Who's asking? Devon replied, his own voice wary. My name is Michael Harrison, the man said. I'm Richard Blackstone's personal attorney, and I can assure you, you do not want this matter going to court. Devon smiled, that same quiet, unnerving smile that was becoming his trademark. Court? Who said anything about a court? I just mentioned that my mother had an interesting ring. Harrison studied him, a flicker of professional curiosity in his sharp eyes. He was used to dealing with desperate, greedy people. This young man did not fit the profile. My client, Harrison said, getting straight to the point, is prepared to make you a final, generous offer, $250,000. You sign a comprehensive, ironclad confidentiality agreement, and this all goes away. Everyone goes on with their lives. Interesting, Devon replied, pretending to consider the offer. But I have a counter-proposal. Harrison raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. I'm listening. Nothing, Devon said simply. Absolutely nothing, because this was never about money, Mr. Harrison. It's about something your client lost a very long time ago, and something he will never ever be able to buy back. And what would that be? Harrison asked, intrigued despite himself. A peaceful night's sleep, Devon said. The bus arrived, its doors hissing open. Devon got on, leaving Blackstone's high-powered lawyer standing alone in the rain, a deeply confused and unsettled look on his face. What neither Harrison nor Blackstone knew was that Devon was not acting alone. He was the public face of a quiet, meticulous, and brilliantly orchestrated campaign for justice. 3 months before he had even applied for the job at Oriel, he had sought out the one person in the city who could help him navigate the treacherous legal world of men like Richard Blackstone. Her name was Jessica Chen. She was a rising star in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, a prosecutor who specialized in financial crimes and public corruption. But more importantly, she was the lawyer who had met with Grace Williams in 2018. "Your mother came to my office," Jessica had explained during her first secret meeting with Devon. They had met in a small, anonymous coffee shop in Queens. She had documents, she had dates, she had names. She had everything we needed to open a full-scale investigation into Blackstone's real estate dealings. "And why didn't you do anything?" Devon had asked, the old, familiar anger burning in his chest. Jessica's face had hardened. "Because 48 hours after she left my office, our key corroborating witness, a former Blackstone employee who was willing to testify, died in a sudden single-car accident on a clear, dry night, and 2 other contacts, people your mother had mentioned, disappeared from the city without a trace. The case went cold. We had no one left who was willing to talk. Blackstone had silenced them all. But things are different now," Devon had insisted. "Yes," Jessica had agreed, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "They have changed a lot. The political climate is different. The laws on financial transparency are stronger. In 2018, Blackstone was untouchable. Today," she had paused. "Today, he's a target." It was Jessica who had helped Devon devise the strategy. It was her idea to have him get a job at the restaurant, to document every interaction, to record every conversation. "He will behave exactly as we expect him to," she had predicted. "He will be arrogant, he will be dismissive, and he will try to bribe and intimidate you. And in doing so, he will commit a series of new, fresh crimes that we can prosecute, crimes that will give us the leverage we need to reopen the old cases." And then, 2 days after Devon's encounter with the lawyer in the rain, the final, crucial piece of the puzzle fell into place. Devon received an unexpected call at the restaurant. "Devon Williams. This is Theodore Blackstone." The last name made Devon stop dead in his tracks. "I'm Richard's son," the voice on the other end said. "And I think you and I need to have a long, long talk." Theodore Blackstone was everything his father was not. He was quiet, ethical, and deeply, profoundly ashamed of the source of his family's fortune. At 35, he had deliberately distanced himself from his father's business, choosing instead to run a small, non-profit foundation dedicated to urban renewal projects. They met at a discreet cafe in Brooklyn. "My father doesn't know I'm calling you," Theodore explained, his face a mask of weary sadness. "But I've known about Grace Williams for years." "How?" Devon asked. "Because I hired my own private investigators a long time ago," Theodore confessed. "When I first began to suspect that our family's empire was built on something rotten, they found evidence of at least 6 other families, other employees, who were silenced, intimidated, or ruined by my father over the years." He slid a thick, heavy folder across the table. "These are copies of documents I managed to get from my father's private office. Fraudulent contracts, records of illegal payments to public officials, correspondence about how to deal with problematic witnesses." Devon opened the folder. His heart raced. There it was, 30 years of systematic corruption, documented in minute, damning detail. "Why are you giving this to me?" Devon asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Because justice delayed is not justice denied," Theodore said, his eyes meeting Devon's. "And because I have a son of my own now, and I want him to grow up knowing that when it came time to choose between family loyalty and doing the right thing, his father chose to do the right thing." That night Devon called Jessica. "We just won the game," he said simply. The final act was set for the following Wednesday. The annual elite charity gala, a night where the city's wealthiest and most powerful gathered to congratulate themselves on their own generosity. Richard Blackstone was the event's chairman, its biggest donor, its shining star. It was the perfect stage for his public execution. Devon arrived at the hotel as an outsourced employee of the catering company, a ghost in a black uniform, tray of champagne flutes in his hand, completely invisible to the glittering, self-absorbed guests. "Champagne, Mr. Blackstone," he offered, approaching the head table where the billionaire was holding court, posing for photos with the mayor Blackstone. recognized him instantly. His face went white. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed. "Working," Devon replied calmly, his voice clear and steady. "Just like my mother did, the night you threatened to kill her." The conversation at the table died. The mayor and the other guests looked from the furious billionaire to the calm, composed waiter, a look of profound confusion on their faces. "Security," Blackstone shouted, but Devon raised a hand peacefully. "There's no need for that, Mr. Blackstone," he said. "I just came to give you something that belongs to you." He placed a single, sealed envelope on the table, right in front of the cameras that were still broadcasting the event live on the city's social media channels. The envelope contained copies of the most damning documents Theodore had provided, along with the transcripts of every recorded attempt at bribery and intimidation Blackstone had made over the past few weeks. "You always said that every man has his price," Devon said, his voice now ringing with a quiet, powerful authority that captured the attention of the entire room. "But you forgot to ask, Mr. Blackstone. You forgot to ask what the price of justice is." With trembling hands, Blackstone tore open the envelope. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to absolute, soul-shattering horror. There it was, 30 years of his crimes, laid bare. Where did you get this?" he whispered. "From your own son," Devon replied simply. "Theodore, it seems, has a conscience, something you never managed to develop." The entire hall was silent now. The cameras focused on Blackstone, who looked as if he were having a nervous breakdown, his face a mask of sweat and terror. It was at that exact moment that Jessica Chen entered the hall, flanked by 4 stone-faced federal agents. It was no coincidence. Devon had timed every detail with the precision of a master strategist. "Richard Blackstone," Jessica announced, her voice booming through the silent ballroom. "You are under arrest for extortion, bribery of public officials, tax fraud, and witness intimidation." The silence was broken by the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs and the frantic, blinding explosion of 100 camera flashes. Blackstone looked around desperately, a cornered animal searching for an escape. "This is a mistake," he shouted. As he was led away, "I have lawyers, I have connections." Devon walked over to where Blackstone was being handcuffed. "Do you know the difference between us, Mr. Blackstone?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying. "You always believed that power was about taking what you wanted from people who were weaker than you. I've learned that true power is about using the system to protect the very people that men like you try to destroy." As Blackstone was led away by the agents, Devon turned to the cameras that were still broadcasting live. "My name is Devon Williams," he said. "My mother's name was Grace Williams. For 29 years, she lived in fear of a man who believed he was above the law. Today, we proved that no one is." The story exploded. It was the biggest scandal to hit the city in a decade. Blackstone's empire crumbled in real time. His stocks plummeted, his business partners abandoned him. The federal investigation that followed unearthed a web of corruption so vast, so deep, that it took down to city councilmen, a state senator, and a half-dozen other powerful businessmen. 6 months later, Devon Williams sat in a sun-drenched office overlooking Central Park. It was the new headquarters of the Grace Williams Foundation, a non-profit organization he had created, funded by a portion of the massive settlement he had won from Blackstone's seized assets. The foundation provided free legal aid and support to families who had been the victims of corporate intimidation and corruption. Richard Blackstone, meanwhile, was awaiting trial in a federal prison, abandoned by everyone he had ever known. His lawyers had managed to get him bail, but it was set at $50 million, an impossible sum for a man whose assets had all been frozen. Theodore Blackstone had taken over what was left of the family business, and was in the process of rebuilding it from the ground up, this time on a foundation of ethics and transparency. He was a regular visitor and a major donor to the Grace Williams Foundation. One afternoon, Devon was in his office, looking at a photograph of his mother. She was young, smiling, the ruby ring sparkling on her finger. Jessica Chen walked in. "He tried to call me from prison last week," she said. "Blackstone, he wanted to offer a deal, information on other corrupt businessmen in exchange for a reduced sentence." "And what did you tell him?" Devon asked. Jessica smiled. "I told him that his information was no longer valuable. I told him that thanks to him, and to you, we didn't need his secrets anymore. We had something better. We had justice." Devon looked out the window at the city below. His mother had died in silence, believing she was alone. But her story, her courage, had started a revolution. The best revenge, he had learned, was not in destroying the man who had hurt his family. It was in building something so powerful, so positive, so filled with hope and justice, that the evil he had done became nothing more than an irrelevant, forgotten ghost in the face of the good he had created.